So the first question is, consider the following statement with respect to Carnatic region. Okay. So the first one, it is a geographic region that encompasses modern day Karnataka and west coast adjoining it. And second one, the famous Chepak Palace is the first Indo-Saracenic style building in India. And third one, the Carnatic Wars resulted in political supremacy of British over Dutch. So kindly mark your answer and then we'll see the right solution for this. There are two kind of traps for you here. And just before discussing this question, I mentioned that Chepak Palace is in Chennai. So from that, you would have got a basic idea that this Carnatic region is not related to the modern day Karnataka. Even though name might sound similar, it is actually the eastern coast of Tamil Nadu and some part of Andhra Pradesh. I'll show you the map also. So that is a Carnatic region at that time. So the first statement is wrong here. And also the third statement is wrong. So the Carnatic wars are mainly fought between British and French. That is mainly over Pondicherry and this Madras state. So that is the first time British has successfully established control or got a political supremacy after these wars. There are three Carnatic wars. So that is why it is very important. And second one is absolutely correct. It is the first time a palace was built in Indo-Saracenic. Here Indo-Saracenic means yesterday we have discussed already, like the our parliament and our Raj Bhavan, all of these are constructed in this style itself. But that those were constructed after 1911 Delhi Darbar. But this was the first building that was constructed in 18th century itself. So that's why second one is correct here. So the answer is A. It is 2 only. Okay. So now we'll see these inner details. And now this is how I want to show you. Like if Chepak Palace is in news, then you have to link it and you have to see the extent to which UPSC might go. Like they might not ask on Chepak Palace, but they might go into architecture, or they might go into the wars, or they might go into how British established supremacy, or they might also go into the other parts of architecture. So this way we have to see it in a this way we have to link it up and see it in a 360-degree view. So today we will cover that aspect or that part through this example. Okay. So as I said, it was in news because the fire hit Humayun Mahal of this Chepak Palace was being restored by using certain traditional techniques. It is not being again restored by using cement or something. They actually brought some oxes and all to plow the material like limestone, mortar, whatever are used in the ancient times. Those were again recreated and being restored. So this is a kind of unique initiative. That's why it got headlines. So if you see the Chepak Palace, it is basically in Chennai right now, and it is constructed by Muhammad Ali Walaja, and he is a Nawab of Arcot. Okay, he's a Nawab of Arcot. Nawab of Arcot is another region which was ruling at that time. So it was during 1855. So after 1855, this palace came into control of British. So this much, if you remember, it is enough. And then the wars we will see. Before that, we will see like the restoration process. As I said, here they are using this Madras terrace roofing process. That is wood, Madras brick, and lime plaster. So these are the things that are used to restore the construction of this Humayun Mahal. And another thing, guys, this Chepak Palace contains two things. One is Humayun Mahal, and the other is Kalas Mahal. So this Humayun Mahal and Kalas Mahal are both important. So this Nawab used to reside in this Kalas Mahal. Okay, and yes, coming back, this roofing is has been seen in many buildings in UK also right now. So and this involves kind of lime, sand, white stone, all preparation, and then applying them, and then putting some red sandstone. So this is a kind of restoration process that they are doing it to bring it to the ancient glory. So now part of this, as it is linked to this Carnatic wars, we'll see how this Carnatic wars have played out. So basically at that time, like it was in 18th century, that is 1700s. So slowly British and French had certain bases for trading, or ports if not bases. So like for example, French had its port in Pondicherry, and similarly British had it in some part of the northern Andhra Pradesh, and also in, that is Machilipatnam, and also in Surat, and then in Bengal, West Bengal. So these are the areas, but they started fighting between them to gain control over more trade. So this is how the fight started. So the first Carnatic war, but actually between the two British and French navies. So that's how it started to extend their control. And in between, when French won in the first Carnatic War, that is, they occupied from Pondicherry to Madras. So they occupied Madras also after French Carnatic War. And then Nawab of Arcot interfered and sent his army, and he was also defeated by French. So the first Carnatic War ended with a French success, and it was Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle. This is also something you have to remember, because sometimes they might give treaty and give a matching pair with the war. So this was the treaty that was signed, and then finally after this, this famous governor called Dupleix, who Dupleix played a key role in winning this war. So what they did is basically they restored certain territories. They gave Madras back to the British, and they took back their lost territory in North America. Okay, this is how they settled the first war. Second war again came up, and this second war this time was primarily because of certain disputes between succession of Nawab of Hyderabad and succession of Nawab of Arcot. So because there was a Nawab and he died, so it was a fight between his son and grandson. And similarly in Nawab of Arcot, and British and French took opposite sides, and that's how this second Carnatic War started. And this finally ended in a stalemate, like nobody won. And finally, the Treaty of Pondicherry was signed. And in this, like they have given back the territories, whatever they had won, but these kingdoms, regional kingdoms, finally were made as an protectorate of either French or British. So this is how slowly the foreign powers have started expanding in the peninsular region. So this is Second Carnatic War, and you also have to remember the treaty here again. It is Treaty of Pondicherry, and by this time, then just after few years, then you have a third Carnatic War. This third Carnatic War actually started with an extension of 7 years war in Europe. So in Europe also there was a war between French and British on opposite sides, and that was extended to India. In that part, there was a famous battle called Battle of Vandivash. This is also very important, guys. Like in this battle, French was decisively defeated. Like they were completely defeated, and British won complete control in where they have occupied even their base, that is Pondicherry. And British have also occupied some other territories in West Bengal. So for the first time they've expanded this war into the Bengal province also. There also there were two territories of British and French, and British occupied French. So that's how British established a complete control on French. And then finally in 1763 they signed a treaty called Treaty of Paris, and then they restored these French territories back to French on a condition that French will never go into extending the political control or extending political influence, and it will not involve in any other domestic affairs. This is how British got supremacy in political control. And from then, you all know, like we had other battles like Battle of Plassey, Battle of Buxar, and all, and then slowly it extended its control into the Mughal Empire. So that's why these three wars are very, very important. And always remember this war with who got defeated and who got won. So first Carnatic War, it is French that won, and Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle. Okay, and second Carnatic War, stalemate. Nobody really won, but this resulted in Treaty of Pondicherry. And third Carnatic War is where British won, and this resulted in a treaty called Treaty of Paris. So this much, if you remember, that is enough. And this is the map. This is a geographic area. So this is what I was saying. So this almost coincides with our modern day Coromandel coast. So this is the green area is nothing but the Carnatic region. So that's why don't confuse it with the modern day Karnataka. So this is why I've kept that fall trap intentionally. Okay. And if you can see, this is the Mysore area, and then you have above Deccan, and then on the right side of Mysore, you have between right side of Mysore and Carnatic, you had Arcot. So this is at that time. And now we'll go to the different architectures, because we have mentioned Indo-Saracenic. There are certain architectures that developed during British India period, and it's very important to know them. So I've taken some examples as well, some pictures, so that you will better remember them. So the first one is neoclassical style. So neoclassical style is nothing but the classical style of Roman and Greek periods were again imitated in the modern period. That is the neoclassical style. So if you know, like during the Greek and Roman times, there were huge temples called pantheons. Like the big temples with very long pillars, like very tall pillars there will be. Like even now in Syria and Iraq, sometimes in news you will see those monuments. So that is Greek Roman architecture. If that is again used to build new structures in the modern period, that is called neoclassical style. So that is what you have it in example as town hall in Bombay. So this is the town hall. Here also you can see the front pillars very long, and you have certain kind of Greek and Roman influence in this. And this usually focuses on geometrical structures. Like here you can see the front part having the triangular structure. So this is a kind of geometrical thing. So this is neoclassical style. So try to always remember architecture or even art and culture with visual pictures. So that is a better way to learn. Next we have neo Gothic. So Gothic is another important architecture. Like here again, they revived the earlier Gothic structure which is present in medieval Europe. Like if you see very recently, the famous example where Notre Dame Cathedral of Paris was burned because of an fire accident. If you would have seen that picture, that is a classic Gothic architecture. Like what happens in that is, can you see this top structures in Chhatrapati Shivaji terminus on the left side image? So these kind of structures will be present in that kind of Gothic style. So this like sharp edges will be there, and these are the important uh, like components of that architecture. And this is revived again in the 18th and 19th century, called in the form of Neo-Gothic architecture. So here you can see like buildings, churches built in Northern Europe during the medieval period was again revived. And the main features are high-pitched roofs. So the roofs are very high, and you can see pointed arches. So this is the thing. These are the pointed arches. Like you can see in the right side picture also. And detailed decoration. These are the important things. And in Mumbai, there are famous neo-Gothic architectures like University of Bombay, High Court, Chhatrapati Shivaji Terminus. All these are from neo-Gothic. So you can see these two images. So the right side one is the oldest one. This is the latest one. You can see the difference also. Here you have certain mix where you are expanding it and then developing it on the vertical side. But on the right side, it is more focused on this pointed arches. So that is the difference. Okay. And then you have this Indo-Saracenic. So basically Indo-Saracenic is called by Europeans. This name was referred to by Europeans, mentioning like Indo means Hindu and Saracenic means like Muslim or Mughal kind of thing that comes from a Persian word. So that is Indo-Saracenic. So what they did is they combined this Hindu elements of architecture like from Rajputs and other things, and with the Mughals or Muslim rulers, and also certain kind of European style were also mixed. So that is Indo-Saracenic revival style. Okay. And the Chepak Palace, situated in Chennai right now, which we discussed, is the first Indo-Saracenic revival building. Remember always, this was built in around 1700s. Okay. And then after that, you had this 1911, and then you have famous Gateway of India in Mumbai and Taj Mahal Hotel. All of these are nothing but the same form of architecture. So you can see this is the oldest image of the Chepak Palace, and the right one is the latest one. Okay. And now finally, Art Deco style. This is the most modern of all the architectures which we have. This was mainly focused in 19th century, sorry, 20th century. That is early 20th century. That is from 1900s. Okay. So you can see the modern sense also here. The importance of this architecture is foldings. So the foldings are very important here. They are very smooth curvatures. So these kind of foldings are called Art Deco, are called Deco Saracenic, because this is again a combination of Indian art and also kind of European modern Victorian influence. So here basically what they do is, outside they will have Indian influence, inside they will have Victorian influence. Okay. So that is the importance of this. And many of these buildings were there in Mumbai. Okay. And this was for the first time started from 1900s. Like as I said, in 1930 many of the buildings were done in Bombay. Like you can see here, like Metro Cinemas, Euro Cinemas. Right now the Mahalakshmi Temple, Regal Cinema and High Court building in Mumbai are these buildings. And another important fact that you have to remember for this prelims is the Victorian and Art Deco ensembles of Mumbai has been for the first time inscribed on UNESCO's World Heritage List. So this was done in December 2018, but it is still relevant. So this makes Mumbai city the second city in India after Ahmedabad to be nominated or to be listed in World Heritage List. So these, the down images both are refers to Art Deco style, and the left one, this one, the Chhatrapati Shivaji Terminus, and then other buildings, which of this neo Gothic architecture. This and this, both of them are dominated for the World Heritage style. Because sometimes you might get a mains question also asking, explain the components or architectural features of this Victorian and Art Deco ensembles of Mumbai. So that's why I'm explaining this in detail, so that you will better have an understanding through the visual images. Okay. So that is about all this first topic. Now we'll go to the second one. So second question, consider the following matches or following matching pairs with respect to the turtles and their primary ecosystem function. The first one, leatherback turtles keep jellyfish under control. This in turn helps maintain healthy fish stocks in the oceans. Second one, hawksbill turtles. They improve seagrass ecosystem health by removing seagrass biomass and prevent sediment formation. And then you have green turtles. These feed on sponges in the corals, and thereby healthy coral reef ecosystem is maintained. So I know this is bit tricky because this is something completely fact based, and you have to know like what turtle does what function, because these are again very important things, because these does certain specific ecosystem function. That is why they are called certain like important species in that ecosystem. And usually what we do is we focus extensively on our olive ridley turtles, and UPSC might sometimes go beyond that and ask this. So that is the main motivation for me to ask this question. Okay, so mark your answer and then we will discuss this in detail, like various other turtles, what are very important, what is the function, what is their IUCN status and all. Okay, so if you're done marking, then we'll see. Answer is D here. So the first one is only correct, and second and third I've just replaced. So basically it is hawksbill turtle that feeds on the sponges in corals, and the green turtles that feed on seagrass. Okay, we will see like why we call this hawksbill, how it is related to sponge. I'll explain that logic, so that way it will be easy for you to remember what function it does. Because if you just keep remembering like green turtle is equal to green ecosystem or grass ecosystem, then you might get confused. Okay, so we'll see in this detail. So the basic inspiration for this is olive ridley turtles, but I went beyond that. So the first we'll discuss this olive ridley and then we'll go through all the turtles. Okay, so you all know that olive ridley are basically migratory turtles, so that come to India for nesting, for mass nesting. And basically this mass nesting is called as Aribadas. This is very important. Aribadas is a word, technical word, that means synchronized nesting. That means they come every year at a same time, and that too all the turtles come at once to synchronize their nesting, and then they go away, and again they come to their birthplace again to nest. So that is the importance of this Aribadas and the olive ridley turtles. And second thing, their primary habitat is like warm and tropical waters, like all over Atlantic Ocean, Pacific Ocean, Indian Ocean, wherever is a tropic is there, tropical area, there they are found. And the important nesting sites in India are basically in two coasts, that is starts from Andhra Pradesh and extends up to Odisha and West Bengal. So in Andhra Pradesh, it is Hope Island of Kuringa Wildlife Sanctuary. So now also try to know more about this Kuringa Wildlife Sanctuary. This is also very important. And then you have in Odisha the other beaches like Gahirmata Beach, Astaranga Coast, and then Rushikulya Beach, and then Devi Beach. This also try to see the order, how they are in the map, and what are the rivers that go through these beaches. And the status of this is vulnerable. And it is also listed in Schedule 1 of Wildlife Act, and it is also listed in CITES Appendix 1. So this is the information that you like maximum that can be remembered for this olive ridley turtles. So next we have loggerhead turtles. So basically I'll show you the first map image so that it will be easy to remember. So like here if you see the left one, this is leatherback sea turtle. So like you can see the black color, right? So this is called leatherback because this roof is basically leather. It is not like skeleton for other turtles, and it is the largest one. So that is why leatherback. And then you have olive ridley sea turtle. This is because the turtle skeleton, this one is basically in the color of olive. So that is why this olive, and this group species of turtles are called ridley. And then you have loggerhead. Loggerhead means this head, that head size, when it is very large, it is called loggerhead. So, and then you have Kemp's Ridley sea turtle. This is very important because this is the smallest species and rarest species. Okay, this usually is found around American coast, that is Gulf of Mexico, on the east side of America, on Mexico and in Florida and above. Okay, warm waters of North America. And then you have hawksbill sea turtle. This is also important. Can you see the head of this? This is like a hawk. Basically, because of this head structure, it can actually bite the sponges and can eat them. That is why it feeds on coral reefs, and that is why this is called hawksbill, because its head structure is like a hawk. That's why hawksbill. Okay, and then you have this one, green sea turtle. The green sea turtle name came because its skeleton, the above part, is basically completely green. That's why green sea turtle. And it mainly feeds on biomass or grass on the seabed of ocean. Okay, and then you have finally the flatback sea turtle, because its back is not like a normal one. Because if you see other turtles, it will be a kind of convex or concave shape, but for this turtle it will be flat. So that is the importance. That is why it is called flatback sea turtle. Now we'll see this in detail. Like you have, as I said, this loggerhead. Loggerhead turtles are named for their large heads that support powerful jaw muscles, and they can eat clams and sea urchins. So this is their function. Basically, it will eliminate this invasive species called sea urchins. Sea urchins are the animals that feed on these things like kelp forests. Do you know the kelp forests? They are like plants that live under sea. So these sea urchins feed on them. And to maintain that ecosystem balance, these loggerhead turtles kill or eat sea urchins. That way, they provide important function to the ecosystem. And their IUCN status is vulnerable. And they basically main nesting grounds are on Mediterranean coast. That is around Italy, all this North Africa and all. And then you have leatherback turtles. Just now we have saw, like leatherback turtles are named because their shell is leather like, not hard. And these again range over entire tropic and semi-tropics. And the main important function of them is that they keep jellyfish under control. They eat jellyfish, and that's how they maintain the fish stocks healthy in ocean, because jellyfish again kill fish, normal fish, and their status is vulnerable. And then you have green turtles. And green turtles are very important because their IUCN status is threatened. From here it starts, like it is threatened, and it mainly feeds on seagrass ecosystem. So that's how they maintain the ecosystem of the ocean. And these are named green because one thing, they only feed on herbivore species. Like unlike other turtles also feed on other animals. Like this leatherback feeds on jellyfish, and loggerhead feeds on sea urchins. But these green turtles feed only on herbivores, that is only on seagrass. So that is why it is called green turtles. And then you have hawksbill. Hawksbill you always have to remember with corals, because they only feed on corals. That is very important. They remove this, they break the sponges of the corals and eat them. That's how new sponges will come, and that's how corals also will remain healthy. That is why it is very important ecosystem species. And but unfortunately, the status of it is critically endangered. So hawksbill is very 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 important. So, and then you have finally Kemp's Ridley turtles. So rest of all the turtles are somewhere near Indian Ocean also. Like you can find them near Indian Ocean as well. But you can't find Kemp's Ridley turtles and flatback sea turtles, because flatback sea turtles are endemic to Australia, and Kemp's Ridley turtles are majorly found in Atlantic Ocean. That too, as I said, near the coast of North America. So as I said, Kemp's Ridley turtles, also called Atlantic Ridley turtles, are the rarest species, and they are critically endangered. Like they are very small in number, and that too around Gulf of Mexico. And then you have flatback sea turtles. These flatback sea turtles are again have the shell as flattened or lower dome. That is why it's called flat. And these are much in number. Their data is not calculated. There is no threat to them right now, but they are very endemic to Australia, and basically in and around Australian continental shelf only you can find them. Okay. And another important thing, I don't know whether you know it or not, but the important difference between tortoises and turtles is that turtles live in water and tortoises live in land or spend most of their time in land, because this is also important thing that you need to know. And having discussed this, I have also mentioned a slide about Indian riverine turtles also. Like certain turtles live in ocean, certain turtles live in rivers. So I've mentioned this, but try to yourself also go through these topics like northern river terrapin or red-crowned roof turtles and starback turtles, because there were almost like 3 questions in the past 5 years on turtles. That is why I'm focusing more on these turtles. Okay. So once again, this is the image, and now we will see certain features of these riverine turtles, Indian riverine turtles. So these are those. So like basically the northern river terrapin is the name. You don't need to remember the technical name on the left side, but see the one which is there under remarks heading. Okay. So northern river terrapin is very important, and it is basically found in Sundarbans, and it is critically endangered. And then you have red crowned roof. So basically its crown will be red color. That is why it is very famous. And it is usually found in National Chambal Sanctuary. So if you remember, National Chambal Sanctuary is also very famous for another thing, that is Gharial. And there was a question in films also. So Gharial is found only in National Chambal Sanctuary. And here also this turtle status is critically endangered. So tomorrow there might be again a question matching this National Chambal Sanctuary with this red crowned roof. So try to remember that way. And then you have South Asian narrow headed softshell turtle. This is endangered, but this is endemic to Gangetic River region. And then you have black softshell turtle. It's almost extinct, but there were some recently found in the temple ponds of Assam. So this is very important. In Hindu also this came. Like these were domesticated, that's why they call still extinct. Now they are trying to introduce them again back in the wild. Like their offsprings are being introduced in the wild. So that is about black softshell turtle. And then you have finally critical endangered Asian giant softshell turtle that is basically found in northeast and eastern coast of India. So these are the other important things. So try to see the images of those turtles so that it will be easy for you also to remember them. Okay. So definitely there will be one question if you are fortunate this year also on turtles. So now we'll go with the third topic. So third topic is about disinvestment. Basically, government has committed 2 or 3 times, like once in budget and before, saying that they will go for around more than 1 lakh crore disinvestment. That's why this was in news. So this is about the concept part of disinvestment. So consider the following statements with respect to disinvestment that was proposed. First one, strategic disinvestment involves not just sale of a substantial portion of the government shareholding, but also transfer of ownership to private players. Second one, in minority disinvestment approach, the government will have minority share post disinvestment, and in majority disinvestment, the opposite happens. Third one, Department of Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade is a nodal agency related to disinvestment. So kindly mark your answer and then we'll see the solution for this. So here again, strategic disinvestment, yes, the first statement is absolutely correct. That is what it means. When you say strategic, that means you should also hand over the control or management to the private players. Only then you call it as strategic disinvestment. Because what happens is, in some forms of disinvestment, you might sell some stake. Like out of 100%, you might sell only 25%, and you'll not give control to the private players. Then it is not called strategic disinvestment. It is called just disinvestment. So that's why first option is correct. And in the second one, in minority disinvestment approach, it is basically means you are selling minority stake. Okay, minority disinvestment. In the name itself says you are selling minority. If you are selling minority, then after that disinvestment, why government will have minority share? It will not have minority share. It doesn't mean it will have minority share. It means it will sell minority stake. Okay, like for example, if it sells only 25% of the entire 100% stake, that is called minority. And then similarly, majority means it is selling majority. Okay, if majority is sold, then government becomes a minority stakeholder. So it is talking about the impact. It is basically confusing you. So that's why the second one is wrong here. It is actually the opposite. And then you have the third one. This is also very kind of a trap question, because it seems very reasonable, like Department of Promotion of Industry looks after this, but this is wrong. Third one is not related to this. It is actually DIPAM. Okay, DIPAM is a nodal agency under Ministry of Finance, that is Department of Investment and Disinvestment and Promotion. something like this heading would be there. We have it in the next slides. But DPIIT is not the nodal agency. This agency is under Ministry of Commerce. So it is the agency that is under Ministry of Finance that deals with disinvestment always. So here again the answer is C, one only. So now we'll see this in detail. Like this was in context because you all know, like Air India government tried twice. Nobody is coming to take Air India, and that is a strategic disinvestment where they are selling completely 100%. Still nobody is coming. And then you had investment disinvestment in BPCL and CCI, that is Container Corporation of India, which went good. But these are the kind of massive investments that went. So that's why these were the terms that we have to know. Like disinvestment, we already discussed. It's about sale or liquidation of assets by government, and you have basically government doing this to one purpose is to bring these companies into profit. Second thing, to get revenue. And then strategic disinvestment, according to the government head definition, it is basically government losing substantial portion of government shareholding of a central public sector enterprise up to 50% or such higher percentage that competent authority may determine, including transfer of management control. This is something you have to remember. When the sale is above 50%, 50% or above, and transfer of ownership, only then you call it as strategic disinvestment. And then you have approaches. We have already discussed this. Minority is like selling minority stake, that is below 51%. Majorities, you are selling majority stake. And then you have complete privatization. It is like 100%. The best example is Air India. Like government wants to sell 100% to the private uh, enterprises. So that's why complete privatization. And this is the one, Department of Investment and Public Asset Management, DIPAM, Department of Investment and Public Asset Management, which is under Finance Ministry, is the department nodal agency that proposes the strategic sale for the disinvestment. And then you have National Investment Fund that is created, where you all send or take the proceeds from this disinvestment and keep in this fund, and then you utilize it for other purposes. So right now basically this disinvestment is being handed over to two agencies. Earlier it used to be only DIPAM, but now DIPAM and Niti Aayog both do it. Okay. And then you have DPIIT as well. This is the one I gave in the option, but there is small current development with respect to this. That's why I have mentioned it in slide. That is basically it used to be DIPP, that is Department of Industrial Policy and Promotion, and then in recently in 2018 or 19 it was converted to Department for Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade, and was assigned with additional function. So earlier Department of Industrial Policy deals with formulating industrial policy, formulating manufacturing thing, and then it also deals with intellectual property, this world intellectual property, and also going ahead with promoting the intellectual property rights and all. So that used to deal with DIPP. Now they expanded its operations and included 4 additional responsibilities. That is promotion of internal trade, that is internally in India. And second thing, welfare of traders and their employees, and facilitating ease of doing business. And finally, matters relating to startups. So all of this will now come under DIP, DPI double T, that is Department of Promotion for Industry and Internal Trade. So that is about DPIIT. Okay. So now we'll see the fourth one. So fourth question, consider the following statements with respect to transaction of business rules 1961. So the first statement, Constitution allows President to frame rules for transacting business for smooth transaction of business. And second one, Rule 12 of Transaction of Business Rules 1961 allows PM in or in any case or classes of cases permit or condone a departure from these rules to the extent he deems necessary. Third one, the President rules in a state can be revoked by President on the recommendations of Council of Ministers, advice headed by PM. Okay. So basically, yeah, kindly mark your answer and then we'll discuss the statements and then solution. If you're done, like we all know, like we have this transaction of business rules according to which we detail like which ministry does what function, which minister is allocated what portfolio, all these things. That is transaction of business rules. And similarly, there is another rules also. That also we are covered in the slide. But there is an basic constitutional article that actually empowers president to issue them. So the first statement is absolutely correct. So the first statement is correct, and second statement is also correct. In this transaction of business rules, usually it is council of ministers or cabinet that takes the decision. But when that cabinet or council of ministers is absent, PM can overdo them, or he can do it whenever he feels necessary. That is a special power that is under rule 2. So second statement is also correct. And third one, president's rule in a state can be revoked by president on the recommendation of council of ministers advised by headed by PM. This is also absolutely correct. This is the usual process. Like when the president's rule imposed, you can revoke it either by council of ministers or by PM, or there is parliament again. You pass a resolution and then in the parliament, Lok Sabha, if they do, and then you can revoke the president's rule in a state. So all the three statements are correct here, 1, 2, and 3. So answer is A. And the reason why this question came in, because in November 12th or 11th, a big constitutional crisis happened in Maharashtra. So there was a president's rule, after there was a hang in the result. Okay. And after that, suddenly the president's rule was withdrawn, and Devendra Fadnavis was appointed as a chief minister. Obviously, after that, again, Shiv Sena came up, and this Thackeray became chief minister. But that was the context. And also, this special power of rule 12 was used at that time. And similarly, it was also used during Jammu and Kashmir reorganization. As I said, there is special provision for Prime Minister to override Council of Ministers advice in certain scenarios. So that is Rule 12. So that is being used in many times. That is why it became in news. And this Article 77 basically first provides for the President to frame rules for the transaction of business. So that's how President framed two rules, that is Government of India Transaction of Business and Government of India Allocation of Business Rules 1961. And out of that, rule 12 is very important. So remember this, according to rule 12, Prime Minister can permit certain cases or can depart from the rules to the extent he deems necessary. And part of this transactional rules, another thing important is cabinet secretary, okay, or central secretariat. This cabinet secretariat is basically responsible for the administration of this entire rules, transaction of business and allocation of business. That's why cabinet secretariat post is very important. So he does all the administration. He is the final executive authority. Apart from that, the role assigned for this secretariat is basically to assist the cabinet and its committees and interministerial coordination. And this way they also propose new policy initiatives by coordinating with all the ministries. Because if you know, in cabinet committees, basically all the ministers from different ministries meet. So when they meet, before in hand they have to prepare like what they are going to discuss and all, and that entire work will be done by cabinet secretary and his secretariat. This is very important, guys, because there was once already a question like what are the functions of cabinet secretariat and all, cabinet secretary, and once there was a question on chief secretary as well. So that's why you have to know this thing as well, because he has certain important role. And also apart from that coordination of ministries, he also, this cabinet secretariat also ensures that president, vice president, and ministers all will be informed of key major activities happening in the ministries. And whenever there is a crisis, this cabinet secretariat conducts this ministry meets and informs them of the event and coordinates their activities. So that is the functions of central secretariat or cabinet secretary. And also this Government of India Transaction of Business Rules has a rule 6, according to which there are certain cabinet committees formed. And right now we have these cabinet committees. So we have cabinet committee on accommodation, economic affairs, parliamentary affairs, political affairs, security, investment and growth, employment and skill development. Now your like whatever you call homework or further study, now you have to know who heads these cabinet committees, because some of them are headed by prime minister, some of them are headed by home minister, and some of them are headed by others. So now you have to know who heads this is also important from prelims perspective. Okay, so that is about cabinet committees and transaction of business rules. Now we see the fifth topic. So that is related to article 22. Again, why this article 22 is in news, you all know, because there were many arrests, like whoever speaks against some controversy, they are went either in sedition or under Public Safety Act. And there was also Article 370 dilution. So entire political leadership of Jammu and Kashmir was booked under this preventive detention. So that's why preventive detention and Article 22 is very, very, very important for this year. You have to know like each and every word and the exceptions and the laws are which are made under this right or this under article. So consider the following statements with respect to Article 22. First one, Article 22 provides the person with right to be informed of ground of arrest, to consult lawyer of one's choice, and to produce before magistrate within 24 hours of arrest. Second one, protection provided against arrest or detention under Article 22 does not apply to alien enemies and those detained under preventive detention law. Third one, the maximum preventive detention that can be made is 6 months. Anything beyond this needs approval of advisory board. So that is a third statement. So now kindly mark your answer and then we'll see the right solution for this. So here again, the 1 and 2, both the statements are correct, but the third one is wrong. The simple thing is here, the maximum detention under Article 22 you can make is only 3 months, not more than that. Beyond that, you need advisory board's approval. And that advisory board should have at least a judge of level of high court. Okay. So that's why the third one is wrong. So 1 and 2 are the answers here. Now we'll see this article in detail. Like in this article, basically talks about rights and protection against arrest and detention in certain cases. But there are two parts in this article. Always remember, one is punitive detention part. The second one is preventive detention part. So in punitive means you basically punishing them. So you arrest them, you prosecute them, and then judge will give some punishment. That is punitive detention. And then you have preventive detention. Preventive detention means you arrest them to make sure that they don't commit the crime. So it is like preventing before crime happens only. So Article 22 gives protection against both punitive detention and preventive detention. So first we'll see punitive detention. That is if there is a case and you are arresting him. In that case, this article gives you certain rights. Those are, first one, in that case of arrest, you should be informed of why they are arresting, the grounds. Second one, they should provide you a lawyer of your own choice. And third thing, they should produce you before the judge, that is our judicial magistrate, within 24 hours of arrest. Okay. And the only exception for this 24 hours is the travel period and the holidays. Okay. And finally, the detention cannot be like beyond what is authorized by magistrate. Like if magistrate says 14 days remand, then he should be there for only 14 days. So this is the kind of rights you have under Article 22. Only exceptions are for enemy aliens and persons that are arrested under preventive detention law. So this brings us to the next part, preventive detention. So under preventive detention, as I said, it is a detention where you arrest someone to ensure that he doesn't commit a crime or certain offense. So in this also there are certain safeguards. So if you are arresting someone before committing the crime, then maximum you can detain him only for maximum period of 3 months. So if it is going beyond 3 months, before that completion of 3 months, you have to call for an advisory board. And in that board, at least a judge of level of high court should be there. Only when he approves, you can extend the detention. And the only exception for this advisory board thing is Parliament will have the power to make any special law extending the duration of detention. Okay, that is the thing. And then the detained person have certain rights where he should be informed about why he was arrested as much as possible, as soon as possible. And if government doesn't want to tell why he is being arrested, then it should be only under public interest. If the public interest is involved, then government can withhold from sharing that information why he is arrested. Okay. And then finally there is a clause 7 in Article 22. That is what we talked in the above, like where they can bypass even the advisory board. According to this article only, the central government made certain laws. So this clause of Article 22, 7 of 22 gives central government or Parliament to make any law to extend the detention period and to obviate the need of even advisory board, and also can go for not telling the reason to the arrested one. So this is about these exceptions. And under this clause 7 only, the government made Preventive Detention Act, Public Safety Act, and then you have AFSPA, and then you have Unlawful Preventions Act, that is UAPA. So all these terrorist related activities and all these important activities are related to preventive detention. So that is basically clause 7 of Article 22. So this is how much you have to remember. So basically, always remember, according to Article 22, there are two parts. If you are detaining him under preventive detention, he has these rights. Only exceptions are for enemy aliens and preventive detention law. In preventive detention law also, you can maximum detain for 3 months. But if it is going beyond that, then it should be under certain central law or a law made by the parliament. And that you have seen, like you need again advisory board and all. So these are the things you have to remember for Article 22. So now we'll see the sixth one. Consider the following statements with respect to transgender persons. This is because transgender bill was tabled and it got approved. So finally it became an act. So the first one, district courts only have the authority to give certificate of identity indicating the gender as transgender for transgender persons on applying for the same. Second one, every transgender person shall have a right to reside and be included in his household. Third one, the act defines a transgender person as the one whose gender does not match the gender assigned at birth. Fourth one, the act also provides for reservation for transgender persons in employment and education. So kindly mark your answer. We'll go a bit fast because we are still at sixth question. So if you're done, basically the first option is wrong here. It is not district court, but it is district magistrate. That is nothing but collector. So he is the one who gives this certificate of identity. So first one is wrong, and second and three are correct. Again, the fourth one is wrong. This was the demand of transgender persons, but this was not included in the bill or in the act. So 2 and 3 is the only answer. So that is D. And these are the important features of this act. The first thing is that they can apply for a certificate of identity and district magistrate will give this identity. And second thing, it defines transgender person as the one whose gender does not match with the gender that is assigned at the birth. And it can include trans men, trans women, persons with intersex variations, queers, persons with socio-cultural identities. Like anyone who feels that they are transgender, then they can go and apply for that certificate, or can go and apply, can get it, and can use it. And this act completely prohibits the discrimination in various fields, right from education, employment, and to access to public offices. And then the important thing is that this transgender person will have the right to reside in their house, like even if their family doesn't allow. If there is very big problem, then they can be placed in rehabilitation centers. And then finally, act should has a provision for National Council for Transgender Person, like National Human Rights Commission. There is a National Council for Transgender Person. It will give advice to central government from time to time and gives reports about their welfare and for taking care of them for them. So this is about Transgenders Act. These are the important features. So try to know the definition, Transgender Council. Try to know who approves this identity certificate and what is the prohibition of discrimination. These are the things important from Transgender Persons Bill. So now the question seventh one. This is like we are dealing cyclones and monsoon, like from like step by steps process. Like we have seen the cyclones process, and then a naming of cyclone, and then we have seen recently on Indian Ocean Dipole. Now it is about Madden-Julian oscillation. So consider the following statements with respect to Madden-Julian oscillation and its impact. First one, it is westward moving pulse of clouds, rainfall, winds, and pressure near the equator that typically recurs every 30 to 60 days. Second one, when it is over the Pacific Ocean for a long time, it brings good rainfall over Indian subcontinent. Third one, while Indian Ocean Dipole and El Nino remain over their respective positions, MGO is a traversing phenomenon. Here MGO is Madden-Julian oscillation. So kindly mark your answers. Then we'll see the right answer here. So this is again a kind of trap question for you, because there are many keywords that you have to focus here. The first statement is wrong here because it is eastward moving. It is not westward. So basically this phenomenon starts in somewhere in the nearby Africa, and then it goes to Indian Ocean, and then to Pacific, and then to Atlantic, and again the circle starts. So this is eastward moving. And this is a phenomenon of like low pressure, high pressure area moving in 30 to 60 days from one place to other place, that is in the east direction. So the first statement is wrong here, and second statement is also wrong. because wherever this phenomena is there, under that only there will be huge rainfall. So if it is under Indian Ocean, then the rainfall will be good under Indian Ocean. If it is Pacific Ocean, it will not be good in Indian Ocean. Instead it will be opposite. So the second statement is wrong. And the third statement is correct. Actually, third statement is correct. So the, because IOD, Indian Ocean Dipole, and El Nino are static phenomena, because IOD deals with warmer temperatures in Arabian Sea when compared with Bay of Bengal, whereas the El Nino is something related to western coast of Pacific, that is Chile and Peru with Australia, but they are static, they don't move. Whereas this MGO is actually most moving phenomenon, that is why they call traversing. So that is why third one is the correct one. So the answer is A here, it is not D. Kindly mark your answer as A. Okay, third one is the correct answer for this. So now we'll see this in detail. Like it is basically found by two scientists, Roland Madden and Paul Julian. And this is eastward moving. This we have discussed already. Everything we have discussed, like how it happens and all. I'll just show you the map. Like see, it starts here somewhere in the Indian Ocean. And basically what happens is all these clouds move up, and then you have the low pressure, and then you have heavy rains in Indian Ocean, and then in 30 to 60 days this phenomenon moves eastwards, and again in Pacific Ocean it happens again, from there it moves again further eastward. And the important thing is, if it coincides with the monsoon, then you will have very good monsoon even when El Nino is in the opposite side. But if you have it delayed, because when if the monsoon is happening in June 1st, and this phenomenon MJO is happening somewhere in May or April itself, then you will have reduced monsoon effect. That is the importance. So you have to coincide with the monsoon. That is a way you will have good impact. So now the eighth question. Consider the following statements with respect to new defense acquisitions for Indian Armed Forces. Poseidon 8 aircraft is also known as submarine hunters and used for anti-surface ship warfare. It is extensively used for surveillance. Second one, airborne warning and control system aircrafts, also called AWACS, provide 360 degree span view of surveillance on enemy air defense systems and to prepare an air situation picture useful in aerial combats. Kindly solve this question, because this you might have already known if you read newspapers constantly, because these are the two aircrafts right now being used even in Ladakh or Leh right now against China. The P8 is basically an Indian Navy one. In the first and two statements, both are correct, and the answer is C, both 1 and 2. Because the P8I aircraft is basically to counter the submarines, because submarines have certain advantage, that is stealth. You will not know where they are. So to find them, this will have certain radar system, and they also deploy sonar buoys. That means they will drop some buoys in the water, in the ocean, and they will see for the sonar signature of submarines. That's how they will track. And they can go for a long voyage. That is, they can go on surveillance for about 400 to 500 kilometers. Sorry, not 400, 500. At 400, 500 speed, they can go for thousands of kilometers. And they can detect submarines, and they can drop even torpedoes against submarines. So that is why they are called submarine hunters. And we have acquired it from US. That is important of P8I. So right now we are using P8I and AWAC. AWAC, another thing is AWAC is like a radar system deployed on top of aircraft. So that is basically having a radar with 360 degree view, so that you can know what enemy aircraft are coming before itself. So that is AWAC. And this also we deployed in against Balakot strikes and also right now. So that's why these two are very, very important. So you also need to focus your attention on certain defense things as well, because you never know, UPSC might ask them as well. So this is the thing. As I said, it travels with 450 mph and has a range of about 4,500 nautical miles, and it can detect submarines up to depth of 40,000 feet. And the same thing, it is called submarine hunters and all. And it has basically active electronically scanned array. Okay, that is the important thing. And AWACS, we have seen, like it is basically Indian system is AWAC, Netra. It is called Netra. That is built on foreign aircraft. So that is Netra AWACS. That is, we are using Embraer aircraft from Brazil. In the down you can see. So I'll share the slide. Kindly go through it in detail. It is the same thing that we have discussed. I'll show you the image also. So the right one is this Netra. So you can see that radar right on top of the aircraft. And the left one is P8I.